Suspicious drones flying over airports in Denmark last night.
A suspected drone caught flitting and floating about as though playing with authorities.
Copenhagen Airport shortly after sunset. Airport control spots several unidentified objects which appear as drones. But this was just the start.
There are fresh reports of drone sightings at Aalborg Airport in Denmark.
Drones were spotted near airports and military bases across the country each day of that week, and everybody was quick to blame Russia. The Baltic Sea is their economic lifeline. These two ports alone together export 60% of Russian crude oil. These shipments must cross the Baltic Sea and pass through the Danish Straits, which gives Denmark strategic leverage during wartime. But also, they could limit mobility of Russia's Baltic Fleet, which is headquartered in Kaliningrad. The security landscape of the Baltic Sea has drastically altered. Before Finland and Sweden joined NATO, the Baltic states became independent, and Poland and East Germany were satellite states. Russia had far-reaching influence in the region, but that influence has now largely waned. But why would they send drones over Danish airports? And is it really them? Or could there be another plausible explanation? This is Denmark's key to Europe's defense with hindsight.
Denmark says the drone incursions that forced the country to close its airports this week are a coordinated hybrid attack.
The drone incursions led to an army of journalists and online investigators to look for who was behind these attacks. This happened while Denmark holds the presidency of the Council on the European Union, where one of the topics of debate is Europe's support for Ukraine. But let's not jump to conclusions. To understand who is behind this, we must first understand Denmark's geopolitics. After Denmark was liberated, many Danes supported the idea of becoming a neutral country, like Sweden, and there were attempts to create a Nordic defense union. But the turning point came when a coup in Czechoslovakia cemented communist power in the country, which Danish leaders saw as proof that small, neutral states could forcibly be drawn into the Soviet sphere of influence. Denmark consists of a peninsula and somewhat 400 islands that are situated between the North and the Baltic Sea. To travel between these waters, you must pass one of 3 passageways, of which Øresund is the most traveled. At its narrowest point, this choke point is just 4 kilometers or 2.5 miles wide. When Denmark became one of NATO's founding members, it became a huge asset for the alliance. It became one of Denmark's core responsibilities to keep the Soviet Baltic Fleet from entering the North Sea. This body of water to the Soviet Union was even more important than it is to Russia today. Their Baltic Fleet was magnitudes larger, and the Soviets kept their largest storage sites of petroleum, as well as key shipbuilding and maintenance facilities on its shores. And this water was of key importance to foreign trade. In the 1960s and 70s, foreign trade was still very limited in the Soviet Union. The Soviet leadership feared that this could threaten the monopoly of the state. But over time, as they cemented power, they increased their reliance on foreign exports and allowed it to grow more than 5-fold. A substantial part of their merchandise was shipped through the narrow straits of Denmark. And while leaders in the Soviet Union and in the West were trying to ease the tensions, their generals were preparing for war. Both sides were preparing for an all-out conflict, and now that much of NATO's communications are declassified, we have gained insight in what they were expecting to happen. They expected a conflict to open fronts from Turkey to the Mediterranean and around Denmark. A classified report read, "A substantial body of evidence indicates that, in the event of a war, Russia plans a coordinated phased offensive operation against Denmark." They said that it would look something like this. Polish divisions would conduct a landing operation, while warships from Kaliningrad and East Germany would provide backup, and ground troops would try to force their way over the peninsula to launch an attack on Norway, all to secure access to the Danish Straits. They were also considering nuclear strikes on Esbjerg and Roskilde to force Denmark into submission. NATO was preparing for such an event. The Danish military in the region had one main goal: keep the Baltic Fleet from entering the North Sea. They purchased ships like these, which have the capacity for 300 to 400 mines and these doors at the stern could be opened to lay these mines at sea. In the event of a war, they would line these waters with mines to create an unbreakable barrier. Luckily, we never saw how these plans would play out.
Following Russian strikes on energy facilities in 9 regions of Ukraine.
One of Russia's main targets in Ukraine is its energy infrastructure. And this gives us some insight in what modern warfare on the continent might look like. And that's bad news for Denmark. They are situated between Northern and Western Europe and between the Baltic and North Sea, which are some of the windiest regions on Earth. These are all the existing wind farms and those that are under construction. Denmark is building artificial islands to serve as energy hubs, to take advantage of its strategic location to be a leader in renewable energy. Their goal is to channel energy from production sites to regions with higher demand. And they're perfectly located to be an energy hub. And that adds a new dimension to Denmark's geostrategic importance.
Unidentified drones were seen near one of Denmark's biggest military installations.
The unauthorized drones spotted over several airports last night were part of a hybrid attack.
It started on Monday evening with 2 to 3 large drones over Copenhagen Airport. It forced the airport to close for several hours, and later that evening another drone was sighted over Oslo, forcing its airport to close for several hours.
The big question is, who is responsible?
The investigation started. On Wednesday evening, several more drones were sighted over airports and military bases across the country. And the leading hypothesis now was that these were launched from sea. This released an army of internet warriors scouring through publicly available shipping data. But the issue is that most Russian ships aren't registered. In 2022, before most of the sanctions, 20% of ships carrying Russian oil were unregistered. By 2024, this had risen to 80%. This is Russia's shadow fleet, a network of 600 to 1,000 ships that are operated by Russia to avoid sanctions, and most, at some point in their life, ship through the Danish Straits. It didn't take long before 3 of such ships were identified to be close to Denmark when the drones were airborne. This is how they traveled between September 21st, the day before the first drones over Copenhagen Airport, until the evening of September 23rd. And analysts pointed out something curious. The Astral One made irregular movements before entering the Øresund Strait. It also passed Copenhagen Airport right around the time that drones were flying in this area. The day after the news broke about these ships, another story broke. Journalists from a Danish news outlet had rented a helicopter and they took to sea. They found a Russian warship laying just 12 kilometers or 7.5 miles off Denmark's coast. They had turned off their tracking system, and they had most likely been sitting there for days. The ship was located right here, off the coast of Langeland. The nearest drone sighting was 70 kilometers away, and the farthest was 270 kilometers from the ship's location. The journalists argued that this ship could have acted as a drone base, or it could have provided support for Russia's shadow fleet, but the evidence is circumstantial at best. Another analyst remarked, the ship could have served a few roles: as a diversionary measure, an observational platform, or as a backstop for Russia-linked merchant vessels involved in launching the drones. While it doesn't prove anything, it does provide us with a working hypothesis. New drones were identified that following day, and they were now also flying over Karup Air Base, the main airbase of the Royal Danish Air Force.
We will propose immediate actions to create the drone wall.
NATO will implement a number of additional counter-drone measures that will build and accelerate our ability to counter drones.
These drone incursions coincided with similar events in other European countries. It sparked debate about Europe's air defense, and it added urgency to respond to the threat of Russia. It also exposed the role of Russia's shadow fleet. Russia used to sell most of its oil to European countries, but this was down to just 6% by 2024. In its place came India, whereas they accounted for just 1% of exports in 2021. They now buy about a third of all Russian crude oil. This is mostly shipped on Russia's shadow fleet. These vessels often lack insurance, are past its usual lifespan, and often skip inspections. it is a security risk, and that also created an opportunity. Denmark is constrained by treaties that allow free transit of ships through these straits, but there are some exceptions. This is the main legal framework for the seas. Under Article 44, it says, "States bordering straits shall not hamper transit passage." But there are a couple of exceptions, like those under Article 2020, discussing enforcement. It says here that exceptions can be made if there are clear grounds for believing that a vessel has, during its passage, violated applicable international rules and standards for the prevention, reduction, and control of pollution from vessels, which is the case for many, if not most, ships in Russia's shadow fleet. Denmark is considering options to stop the shadow fleet from carrying Russian oil through these straits. One of the options is an insurance crackdown. Denmark could stop these tankers and demand a proof of insurance, something which many of them lack. But such actions are legally and diplomatically delicate. While Denmark has the right to intervene, it must act proportionately under international law. And if it were to apply these measures solely to Russian tankers, the move could be interpreted as an act of aggression.
So let's answer that last question. What does anybody stand to benefit from sending these drones to Denmark? Well, there are a couple of theories.
These incidents triggered a response from the police, military, and air force. These drones could have been sent to study response procedures, to gain insight in how the police and military engage with a threat, or to map radar and communication infrastructure.
These drones were flying close to critical NATO infrastructure, but experts have pointed out that the kind of intel that they could have gathered would have been very limited.
So other experts argue that it's most likely political. These drones could have been intended to create public anxiety or to send a message. It happened while Denmark was hosting a meeting of the European political community, and it influenced the debate.
So right now we have little more than theories. About a week after these incidents, the French arrested 2 men that were aboard one of these Russian ships, but we're still waiting for official reports and investigations. So it is very easy and tempting to connect the dots already. But yet, there's no conclusive evidence that points at how this happened and why.
And you must have heard about what is happening in the United States. Their national debt has reached nearly $38 trillion, over $110,000 per citizen. Interest payments consume 6% of GDP, which is more than defense spending. These kinds of economic vulnerabilities are exploited globally, and particularly by China, who holds hundreds of billions in US treasuries. And against this backdrop, security is back at the center of US policy. But the part that you may have missed is a government mandate that requires TSA to begin employee screening across all US airports.
It's a major security shift at TSA checkpoints nationwide.
Questioning the effectiveness of the Transportation Security Administration.
This translates into a major security investment with a deadline of April 2026. Liberty Defense Holdings, ticker LDDFF in the US market and the sponsor of today's video, are a firm developing next-generation threat detection technology for airports, stadiums, and government facilities. They already raised $45 million to fund product development, but yet their company stock is currently trading near all-time lows, with a market cap of roughly $16 million, a fraction of what it has already raised to fund development and deployment. Their flagship product is called Hexwave. This came out of research at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, and it was further developed through partnerships with the Department of Homeland Security and the Transportation Security Administration. So one of the best parts of this entire proposition is the company leadership. Their management team comes from the biggest names in the industry, and they have decades of experience with US Customs and Border Protection. And their product just makes intuitive sense. It is a walk-through portal that uses millimeter wave technology, 3D imaging, and AI to detect metallic and non-metallic weapons in real time, something that no other technology can do. You just walk through without having to remove your jacket, your shoes, or your personal items. And that is how it manages to scan up to 700 people per hour. It is developed by people who understand the industry and who have the connections. That's why they attracted attention from agencies like the TSA, DHS, and Los Alamos National Laboratory, which already deployed their system, TSA even recently awarded Liberty Defense a multi-million-dollar sole source contract, which includes retrofitting about 1,000 body scanners with their new high-definition imaging technology. In short, Liberty Defense is positioning itself as a leader in next-generation security scanning. They combine cutting-edge technology, exclusive government relationships, and growing federal mandates. Their shares are currently trading near historic lows, and this government mandate that will require a major investment in security systems by April 2026 makes this company worth watching very closely. Visit libertydefense.com to learn more about the Hexwave system and its role in redefining public safety.